Are you ready for your next session? Here we have the wonderful Chantelle, who's talking about how to be the go-to person using podcasts. So we're continuing the podcasting theme as we use this to become the go-to person. I've done this with my YouTube Success podcast. I know plenty of people who use this strategy, so I'm really delighted to see what Chantelle's got in store for us. Over to you, Chantelle.
Hello and welcome to this session on how to use podcasts to get known as the go-to person in your industry. And this session is all for Creator Day. So welcome and thank you for joining me for the next 30 minutes where we will be going into a number of different areas of how to get known as the go-to person in your industry. Now, this session is for you if you want to have that status and be known in your industry and have a reputation that precedes you because other people can say what you do on your behalf before other people have even met you. In terms of a podcast, you may already have one, or if not, you plan to have one someday. And lastly, you've got a message or a cause that you are passionate about and want the world to know about, that you want to have impact with, and that you want to use for change. And that is what we're going to cover in today's session. The main and single aim is to learn how podcasts can get you seen as that industry expert using podcasts to your advantage. Now, before we get into that session, I want to share a little bit about me now that I've explained who you should be if you're going to stick around. Now, I am Chantelle Dyson, aka the Clever Content Creator. I am a teacher turned entrepreneur. I was a maths teacher for 7 years, including Key Stage 3, head of year. And at a certain point in my life, I turned to changing that. And that was because, 5 years ago now, I went through a divorce in my late 20s. And it caused me to question everything that was going on in my life. I got to a point where I'd followed that trajectory that pretty much everyone is sold. You know, you do well at school, go to uni, get a good job, buy a house, and if you can find someone along the way to settle down with. And I did all of that, but it wasn't making me happy. So I had a whole personal development deep dive. And as part of that, I wanted to know myself more. And I also wanted to become better in my role as a teacher. I was a head of year, so I was kind of a mentor and a guide, but I wanted to let pupils make their own decisions a bit more and empower them to do that. So as part of that venture, I became a life coach, went through Jay Shetty's certification program and have that as a life coach. Now, as part of it, at the end of the session, it asks you what you want to do as a business venture. And I was like, I don't really know. But one of the exercises was to think about yourself a couple of years ago. And I wasn't really intending to do this in any manner because I just signed up to upskill myself in my current career and to learn more about myself and do a personal development full deep dive, go to another layer. But I did it based on the fact that I got divorced and I started to become a life coach for single women. And I actually found that I loved talking about the topic, that I wanted to help people in the position that I had been in. And that's what grew the idea of Chantelle the Coach. I couldn't use my name at the time, Chantelle Dyson, because the school weren't too sure about how that was going to work out. So I had to brand in a different way. And as part of that, I chose to start a podcast. And for the reasons that I'll mention later on in this session, it will become clear as to why. The Single Girl's Guide to Life was a weekly podcast and it ran for just under 2 years, of which we reached 100,000 downloads fully organically. So no paid ads, no ad spend. Yes, I had to spend a lot of time editing it and promoting it in particular ways, again, that I'll talk about in this session, but it was fully organic and I'm super proud of it getting as big as it did. As a result of that, I ended up on BBC Essex, Essex Live, which is local to where I am, but also places like Huffington Post and Yahoo as well, on articles talking on matters to do with single women. And since then, I've pivoted into helping other people to start their podcasts so that they can have change in the world. I was tackling loneliness in single women and empowering single women to embrace their single life, even though they're on their own and society says that, oh, but you're not in a relationship and that's not okay. Now I help other people establish themselves in their industry through podcasting so that they can have the same impact that I was starting to have and still plan to continue with in terms of changing the way the world thinks and creating community for all. So that's a little bit about me. You've probably been able to tell a bit about my values and what I stand for. But I want to come back to you and this session now because we don't have a lot of time. So the first thing I want to kick off with is, what is the go-to expert? Lots of people think that it means that you have to have the biggest following in the world and be known by so many people. So let's start off with a little, you can call it a quiz if you want, because I haven't put any names on, but hopefully based on the theme of today, you know who this is. Give you a moment to think about it just in case. And maybe you don't. Maybe you're early to the creation phase. And this is Gary Vee, as he might be known, or Gary Vaynerchuk, one of your biggest people in marketing and content creation and media. Now, he is very well known. 10.1 million followers on Instagram as we speak. Here's number 2. Any ideas who this person is? Again, I'll show you the stats on it. I chose this person because to me, they're well known, and to many people, they'll be well known. But it's very possible that even with 5 million followers, you don't know who this is, maybe by face. The name is Brené Brown. She's written plenty of books. Daring Greatly is one of the biggest ones. And she's a researcher. She looks at vulnerability and courage, very much from that personal development world. And quiz question number 3. Any ideas who this guy is? This is Matthew Hussey. He's a dating coach, so very much linked to my single life background. He has 1.7 million followers on Instagram, a massive YouTube page. All of these people have podcasts of some description, YouTube channels, Instagram pages. They are very much known in their industry, and you're probably looking at those numbers thinking, whew, yeah, 10.1 million, 5 million, 1.7 million. Great to have. Love to have it. And of course, I would be well known for what I'm doing. But there's a little bit of a thing where we think that you've got to have all of the numbers to be the go-to person in your industry. And don't get me wrong, there are equivalents that surround these people, but they're not the only go-tos. So you can play along with the quiz on the next one, but I'm going to imagine this is slightly harder for you on this next section of slides. Here's somebody here, very much well-known go-to expert in their industry. They are a business strategist. And if I said this name in particular groups, they'd go wild for it. If you don't already know who that is Lisa Johnson. She's just had a £3 million launch for her latest course. Been in business, as she determines, about 6 years. So not that long when you compare it to some of these guys who have been in their industries, as it were, for 10 plus years. But managing to create revenue in her business with 47,000 followers only, compared to the millions we just saw before. You've also got this person. Again, I'll leave it for a second so you can try and work out who that is. If you don't know, that's Rob Moore. He started out in property. That's where it began, helping people. He flipped his own properties and rented them out, etc. Then he taught other people how to do it, and now he has multiple businesses. He is very disruptive. He likes to tear up the rule books and likes to stand out online. His following's a little bit bigger, but he's very much known for the caveats of property in particular. Also quite a lot of content as well. So some sort of competitor to Gary Vee in some way, but very different in how they operate. And then there's an empty gap, because that go-to expert could be you. And I want you to, from just that short little quiz, is to understand that it's not just about the numbers that's going to get you known. What gets you known is being known for something within a group of people. You might never have heard of hardly any of those names that I just brought up. They are all very well known to me. I have seen them speak. I have maybe purchased some of their products, their books, seen their TED Talks, whatever it might be. They're known to me, and they're known to a bunch of people. In certain rooms, I would say that name and they'd know exactly who it is. And it always surprises me when I mention any of these names, or someone like Jay Shetty, and people still don't know who those people are. Some of them have been growing, so, they're getting a bit more known. Stephen Bartlett being another one. I was well into that crowd years ago. I feel that way about Joe Wicks. Everyone ruined my Joe Wicks fandom until COVID, when he just became massive and everybody saw him as the body coach. So it's all about this. You don't have to be known by everyone to have success. And I talk about this from my own perspective. So this picture hopefully would let people know that I am Chantelle the coach. I'll be the clever content creator at that point in time. So that's to do with podcasting, teaching entrepreneurs how to get seen online through podcasting. If they saw this image, hopefully they would be looking at Chantelle the coach, the person that helps people to build confidence in their single life and then date the right way when they're ready to find the right guys. And the picture on the end, that could be open to anything. That is my personal Instagram profile. So therefore, that's daughter to Debbie, sister to Ben. It could be Miss Dyson, the maths teacher, whatever it might be. and actually theatre. I've got a background in theatre as well. So there's a bunch of people that would look at that and see me as different experts to some degree based on how they know me, what they see me for, and what they've seen me talking about. And I have a bigger audience with Chantelle the coach, but I would say I'm more well known, as it were, for the podcasting, because I've worked so hard in terms of the locality of actually getting people to talk about it, to refer, etc. So there's lots of different ways you could see it, but it's not just about the numbers, although the numbers are going to be helpful if you're trying to grow. Now, I'm going to delve into the 3 mistakes that might be stopping you from getting known as the go-to expert. These are the things that I see people doing when they're trying to establish their brand, trying to get seen online and trying to be that person, but they're stopping themselves. They're getting in their own way in some way, and they're just doing the wrong things to actually get to that point. So number 1 is that you don't see yourself as an expert or the expert of whatever you're talking about. And that looks like this. In terms of podcasting, and you think, oh yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. You've bought the equipment. You've said, I'm going to do it. And then you don't. It is in a corner or in a drawer right now, gathering dust. And
if you're enjoying this session, don't forget to hit the thumbs up or like button, and of course subscribe to the channel. Now, it would be wonderful if you could leave a comment, some supportive, positive comment for the speaker, because they will definitely read the comments here on YouTube. Thanks.
And you're putting it off because you don't feel like you know what you're going to say. You don't feel like you've got enough to share with the world, even though some days you do, but when it comes to actually recording, you don't, and you just put it off. The next one is that you've actually launched your podcast, but you're not telling anyone about it. You don't think it's good enough, that you're worried what other people will think of you if you put yourself out there. And don't get me wrong, like I had the school pressure of them going, oh, we don't think you should be putting yourself out here online like that. We need you to create a different persona online. I'm going, right, well, I've built up the courage to start putting myself online, and now you're really feeding that belief that maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And maybe it's not the best idea. So totally get it. And you are always like, oh God, what if your friends and family see? I had, what if the pupils see me? Because let's not talk about school playground rumors and chat. And quite often you're going to be looking at all the other creators and experts, comparing yourself to them, saying things like, I don't know it all, so I can't be the expert. All of these things are indications that you thought about having a podcast to raise your profile, or that you were going to start making content and put yourself out there, but you're just stuck in the comparison game, worrying what other people are going to think. And the truth is that you individually have a message to share. We each have our own tales and experiences that make us our own. And we have to get out there and share that story in order to have some level of impact. You got a little taster of my story right at the start. I didn't have time to go in it in detail. The Single Girl's Guide to Life goes into the most appropriate stories for that brand. It tells people about how I felt during the divorce, how I navigated it since then. And I never tell anything live. I tell it retrospectively once I'm at peace with it. So there's nothing emotional or too dramatic going on. But I saw myself as the person that was 2 steps ahead. I wasn't in a relationship when I was talking about dating, but I had managed to get myself to a point where I wasn't being run around with people messing me around in dating. When it comes to podcasting, I very much help people set up and start their podcast and do some of the early promotion and growth. It's a different ballgame when you are 2 to 3 to 5 years in and you are thinking about ways to innovate and create. And I'm in that phase with the Single Girl's Guide whilst sorting out the business side of it. So that's still being worked out. Whereas starting a podcast, getting the name, establishing yourself, learning how to present, do it confidently, overcome the mindset you have before you actually jump in and do it, that's the kind of work that I do. So I'm not complete in any of those. I'm not the master of them. There are other people about doing similar things, but I do things in a particular way and at a very specific point for people. The next thing is that you are not standing out. Chances are that when you are trying to get seen online, you're repeating a lot of the stuff that you've heard from other people, and very little of the content that you put out there is original thought. When people ask you what you do, you can't explain it in a really nice, succinct, simple and effective way. You actually go on for a few minutes or longer, much longer than you ever should. And it doesn't actually come across clearly because you're not confident in what you do. And therefore they're not confident in what you do. And when it comes to content or going on someone's podcast, you'll talk about anything. You will talk about whatever topic someone has given you the opportunity to talk on, as opposed to one that fits with what you want to talk about, what you want to be known for, and therefore get yourself standing out for that, because you're just covering too many topics. And the truth is that you can copycat and look at other people and see what they do for inspiration. But if you take what somebody else is saying, you copy the exact strategies that other people are doing, we end up with this copycat syndrome. And copycat syndrome ends up with all of these people saying the same thing online, kind of just looking different based on their color of branding, as opposed to what they stand for, what they do, who they help. And instead, I need you to be doing this. I need you to be at the front, doing it slightly differently, doing it in your own unique way, which comes from doing it in a way that you know what you stand for, knowing who you are, what you do, and how you do it. And the third mistake is that you're just not visible enough to the right people. So chances are that you might have been posting every day, getting content out there, but you're getting the same old numbers, you're not seeing the growth, and you're only getting 1 or 2 leads, if that matters, in your business, or subscribers. You're spending more time editing content, trying to get people to look at the content and promote it, but what's happening is you're ending up burnt out, and then you don't end up posting at all sometimes. And lastly, you focus more on having guests on your podcast than getting seen yourself. And that means that you're bringing people to your audience, not getting yourself out to other audiences and maximizing that. And the truth is, like, the numbers don't fully matter. We do need numbers to grow and to get known, but my following on the podcasting side is significantly less. It's 500 followers on Instagram. I have a very small TikTok account, but we're playing with that. 550 followers, say, versus Chantelle the Coach, which has 40,000 followers, much bigger there. But the podcast one, I am known much more for, in terms of being tagged in stuff, in terms of referrals, in terms of, oh, you're the podcast person, or I've listened to your podcast, and I get people tell me that. I used to get that with the Single Girl's Guide to Life as well, but it doesn't matter all the time. There's a point at which scale is important, but when you're establishing yourself, it's not the numbers, it's just being very specific, knowing how to stand out online and getting yourself seen by the right people, the people that will be interested in what you've got to talk about, what you've got to say, and what you do. So how do you actually become the go-to expert? First things first, you need to be an expert, and you need to lean into that. You need to be the person and believe in it. And then you need to get people, as many people as possible that are relevant, to know you as that expert, or at least within a degree of separation of that. And that's what's going to make you the go-to expert. So to be the expert, I need you to think about 3 things, and you need to answer these really clearly. And you're not going to do this fully right now. You're going to need to ponder on this, focus on it. Some of you will be great at it, but whether you've got a podcast, you're thinking of a podcast, you're building your brand, you need to have this nailed. And it might mean some changes if you've already launched your podcast and your branding. So the first thing you need to do is know who you are. Chantelle the Coach, Chantelle Dyson, aka the Clever Content Creator. Notice I have personas. Miss Dyson, if you want to go into that one as well. It allows you to understand who you are and what you're representing in each situation. And then linked to that, you need to know what you do in a very succinct way. So in a podcast situation, you have a little bit more time, but you do want just almost like an elevator pitch, but less than. You want a 1-sentence thing to know what you're saying to people and to get their interest. So sometimes when I'm networking, I'll say, I teach people how to start podcasts so they can get more leads in their business. Or I might flip it and go, I teach people how to get more leads in their business through podcasting. And then it's think about the audience each time. I teach people how to get seen online, and we play with it and we experiment and we A/B test until you finalize what you're doing. And mine is very much about getting seen online, doing it the clever way, which means saving time through podcasts. For Single Life, it was building people's single life confidence, empowering them so they could go out there and date without getting messed around. Lastly, it's then how you do it. Now, this is not necessarily modality, not like podcasting or coaching. This is how you go about your entire process, who you are online. So you have an impression of me from having listened to me for 18.5 minutes so far. That's how I am. So I would probably say quite dynamic, positive for sure, and we like to have fun. And that's not going to be for everyone. Rob Moore is incredibly disruptive. It's fantastic to watch, but it can be off-putting because it's so disruptive, it's so direct. And other people need a really calm, nice nature that's soft and supportive and listening. And that's what's going to appeal to one person over another to you. So that's the being the expert part, and you need to work on this. You need to look at who you are, what you do, and how you do it. So who you are, what the brand is, what you do, what you actually help people achieve, or what you're trying to get people to understand, and how you do it. What are the values that sit beneath everything that you do with your content, with your podcast? And the second part is then getting as many people as possible to know what it is that you do. So you have two options. You can either start a podcast, or you can be a guest on podcasts. And there is kind of a third option where you can do both. Now, hopefully you came here with the idea that you already wanted a podcast, but I'm just going to reestablish why podcast is a great idea in 2024. The reason that you want to head towards podcasting, despite the fact that you often get this comment, everyone's got a podcast now and anyone can have a podcast. Whilst it might feel that way if you're in this kind of space, the great thing about it is that the barrier to entry is so low. Yes, lots of people can pick up their phone, their cameras, and get going with the podcast. And whilst we're here on Creator Day, I want to dispel the myth that you need any advanced technical equipment. I recommend if people want a really low budget and just want to get started, because ultimately I want to change the way the world thinks. And if that person just needs to get going on a zero budget, then so be it. They need to grab their iPhone, use the voice memos notes, and upload it to Buzzsprout. That's all they need to do. So yeah, everyone can have a podcast, and that's great. Everyone can access it. But if you're going to say to me that everyone's got a podcast, then I'm going to say everyone's got an Instagram account. Everyone's got a TikTok channel. Everyone's building their YouTube slowly but surely. The competition in the podcasting space is significantly lower. We already know that a significant number of people do not reach their third episode, and then there's a second wave where they don't get past their 10th episode. One of my sole aims when I first start working with people is that they need to get to their 10th episode, and we launch with 4. We've got to have 6 at least planned, or if not recorded, a few more of those ready to go, half and half, and then we get you to that point because we build the system behind it to keep up with the whole process. But it's significantly less than trying to get seen on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, because there's just less saturation. There is not as many people being successful with podcasts, being consistent and showing up, not just with consistency in practicality, but consistency in their messaging, getting it right. We then have the age-old, why would anyone listen to me? Well, I've already covered that one today, because your story matters. You don't know who else is out there that is in the same position you were in, or cares about the thing that you're trying to communicate, and it's your job to try and find them. People will listen to people if they have a skill in talking in some way with passion, and that they care about what they're talking about. If you feel that it's forced and that you're talking about something you don't want to talk about, that you don't care about, it's going to be very difficult. But if you have the passion, the skill, the expertise to share and to let people know what it is that you care about, that will bring people with you. And there are things you can do to make that better. Again, this is the kind of thing that I cover in my one-to-one coaching program, Podcast Power. The next one is that I don't have time for podcasts. So everyone seems to think that podcast takes a lot of time. And I'm not going to lie to you, it takes some time. But if you are the person creating your own content anyway, and you're trying to build your brand, then it's a time-heavy job. Whether you're making reels, whether you're making statics, whether you're writing a blog, a podcast is no more time than any other format. And the beautiful thing about a podcast is that it follows my golden piece of content strategy, where when you have one piece of content that you can repurpose in essentially hundreds of ways. So my golden piece of content is a podcast episode. And that podcast episode can then be turned into, if you do a video version, a YouTube video and a blog post. Now, we're not going to optimize for YouTube. The podcast is the creme de la creme in this version. Lots of other people rotate it. So their YouTube video is the creme de la creme. The blog post is the creme de la creme. But realistically, in my strategy, it's podcast episode at the top because of the audience that you can attract through podcasts directly. There's an affluence behind podcast listeners that, to me, is most important. And you can start with just audio only. YouTube and video can come secondary. So it's not something to think about loads beforehand. You're like, oh, I'm not just got to worry about what I'm saying. I've got to worry about what I talk about, what I do with my hands, how I present. Actually, just an audio podcast to begin with. Much easier. You can do it very easily with your phone. Doesn't matter if you're doing it in your pajamas, you're sitting in a cupboard to make the sound right, whatever it might be. But from there, you are then able to change each of those things further. So we can take the video, even if you've not made a YouTube video out of it, you can take any video recording and change it into snippets, put those out on places like TikTok, Facebook Reels, LinkedIn, Instagram, and they can go on Pinterest too. And the blog can then be turned into an email. It can be turned into quotes that go out on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Pinterest. And then the post itself can be changed into a carousel, which summarizes what the blog is about and what the podcast's about. And then it's a LinkedIn post. And there's so many iterations of this because a quote is obviously only a couple of sentences long. So from a 25 to 30-minute episode, how much content is that? Rather than thinking of all of this content I've got to think about for Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and the podcast itself, all I do every single month to quarter, depending on my planning schedule, is come up with 4 different topics or 12 different topics, and I plan for that. And then once that is created, I then create the other stuff from it, and I've got endless amounts of content. And in terms of the time it takes to otherwise come up with content, it didn't save me, I would say, half the amount of time, especially with AI coming in now. Can pick out some of the quotes, wouldn't go with them all. Opus.pro pulls out the video. Again, gives me about 22 clips per. I would say that I choose about 75% of that, so 14, 15 clips that I actually download and think, oh yeah, this has got some legs. And then I actually, at this point, I've only ended up using, say, 25 to 50% of each of those as they go out or as they're prepared. So I've got a bank of content. I don't even have to, I could be off and someone could run that for me and it would still appear like I was there, other than not showing up live on stories. And that's what you want when you're building your content system and machine to build your brand, is that you can be omnipresent, just like Gary Vee, Brene Brown, all of those people that you see everywhere. When you open up your phone, you're like, oh, you're there again. Because the algorithm knows you, so it's bringing you the same people. And lastly, I know some of you are going to be saying, but I'm not a technical person. And you don't have to be. The way that you can set up your podcast, there are so many tools that can help you nowadays. I've mentioned some of the AI tools, but it's a very simple process. You can edit as you go on your phone if necessary, or there are some basic skills you can learn in terms of editing a podcast through some of the simpler software tools that there are, or you can always outsource. And these are all things that we do at The Clever Content Creator. I predominantly coach people, get people strategic with what they're doing and help them plan what they're going to talk about, as well as get confident on camera, whilst my team are there with a done-for-you service that is able to take that element off of your hands if you so wish. But that brings us to an end for today's session. It has been fabulous sharing all the things about getting known as a go-to expert in the industry. If you haven't yet started your podcast yet and you want to, or you need to do a bit of a reset with one, you've lost traction with it and you need to reboot, I suggest that you scan the QR code, grab your free podcast starter checklist. It's going to tell you the equipment you need. It's going to go through the 5 Ps: planning, presenting, production, post-production, and promoting. So it's going to talk about the way that you can start establishing yourself with a podcast. It gives you the practicalities, some of the ideas around how you name it, and how you can get it out there and start getting more people to look at your podcast so that you can establish your brand and get known as the go-to expert in your industry. Make sure you follow over on The Clever Content Creator on Instagram. It's got full stops in between all of those words. So the.clever.content.creator. There's a story behind that, but I don't have time to tell it. And I hope you've enjoyed the rest of Creator Day.
And that's it. The session is done. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course comment on the video. It really is appreciated to see all the engagement that we get alongside these videos. And of course, if you want to continue to watch these videos after the 48 hours of Creator Day, you can sign up for the Creator Meetup. The link is in the description, as well as the coupon code, and you can go and grab all of the replays and join us for our monthly networking and the other various activities that happen inside of the Creator Meetup. Thank you so much for the speakers, and we'll see you in the next session.